Chapter 1: Red Dust and Webs. The heat clung to everything out here. Not the gentle warmth of a summer day, but a smothering, dry weight that baked the dirt until it cracked and left the air tasting faintly of rust. The horizon shimmered under the late afternoon sun, and the road, if you could call it that, was nothing but a hard strip of ochre dust and gravel. Emily Hart wiped the back of her hand across her mouth and squinted through the bug-specked windscreen. "You said this was a farm job," she said, her voice hoarse from hours of driving. Her partner, Darren Cole, kept one hand on the wheel and the other lazily draped over the open window, letting the hot wind batter his skin. He was the kind of bloke who looked permanently sunburned, the creases around his eyes etched deep from years of squinting against the glare. "It is," Darren said. "Old fella out here's been cowing about a spider problem. Keeps saying it's bigger than he can handle. Could mean redbacks in the shed. Could mean he's losing it from the heat." Emily frowned. Redbacks don't make a man call pest control 4 times in 1 week. And bigger than he can handle? What is that even? The radio in the Uda crackled, cutting her off. It was just static at first, but then a voice, thin and distant, bled through. "Help, please, they're everywhere." The sound dissolved back into hissing static. Darren reached forward, flicked the knob, but got nothing but more fuzz. "Could be him," he said. "Could be anyone," Emily muttered. She'd only been working for Outback Pest Solutions for 6 months, but she'd already learned that most remote jobs ended one of 2 ways. Either it was a false alarm, or it was something so foul and dangerous it would crawl into your dreams and settle there. They drove on for another 20 minutes before the property came into view, a slumped weatherboard farmhouse ringed by skeletal gum trees. The place looked abandoned, except for the faint twitch of a windmill in the distance and a water tank bleached bone white by the sun. Webbing clung to the fence posts, thick silvery bands that sagged in the heat. "Christ," Darren said, slowing the Uda. "That's more than a few redbacks." Emily leaned forward. The webs weren't neat little spirals. They were ragged, sprawling sheets that wrapped around anything that would hold. The gum trees shimmered with them. The lower branches knotted in silk, as if the entire yard had been shrink-wrapped. "Why hasn't he just burned it?" she asked. "Not everyone's keen on torching their property," Darren said, though he didn't sound convinced. They rolled to a stop in front of the farmhouse. The place was silent. No cicadas, no wind, no creak of the screen door in the breeze. Just the hum of the engine and the slow tick of cooling metal when Darren killed it. The air was thick with a smell that made Emily's stomach twist. Dry rot and something sweet underneath, like meat left too long in the sun. They got out, boots crunching on the dust. The webs shifted slightly as if breathing, the afternoon light catching on the fine threads. Emily felt a prickle on the back of her neck. She'd dealt with plenty of spider nests before. Bursts of skittering legs, sudden bites. But this was different. This felt coordinated. Darren banged on the door. "Mr. Gallagher?" "Pest control." His voice sounded too loud in the dead air. No answer. Emily stepped back, scanning the yard. The webs ran all the way to the rusted swing set, winding around the chains until they sagged. Something dangled from one of the seats, a brown shape, unmoving. She squinted. It was a dog, or had been. The fur was matted and gray, the body wrapped in silk, so thick it was just a lumpy cocoon. A dark stain bloomed underneath it in the dirt. "Darren," she said quietly, "we need to—" The door creaked open. A man stood there, shirtless despite the heat, his skin pallid and drawn tight over his bones. His eyes darted from Darren to Emily, then to the webs behind them. "You came," he rasped. "Too late, maybe, but come inside." Emily hesitated. Everything in her body screamed to back up, get in the Uda, and drive until the dust on the road turned back to bitumen. But Darren was already stepping forward. The man's name was Thomas Gallagher, and up close he looked worse, his lips dry and cracked, his hair plastered to his skull with sweat. His hands shook as he gestured them in. The inside of the house was dim, curtains drawn tight. The air was thick, humid, and carried the same sweet-sour stench as outside. Flies buzzed lazily around a plate of untouched food on the table. "They come at night," Gallagher said. "You can't hear them till they're already in the walls." Then the scratching starts. He rubs his forearms compulsively. They take things, small animals first. Then, his voice trailed off, his gaze flicking toward the hallway. Darren shot Emily a look, the kind that said he's not all there, but also let's check anyway. Can you show us? Emily asked. Gallagher's eyes glistened. You'll see soon enough. They went down the hallway, Gallagher shuffling ahead of them. The walls bore faint streaks of webbing, like cracks filled with gauze. Emily's boot caught on something, a small silk bundle the size of a fist. She kicked it aside, and it split open with a wet tear. Inside was something pink and glistening. Flesh. She didn't look too hard. They reached a back room. The window was boarded up from the outside, but the boards were warped inward, strands of web curling between them. A lump sat in the corner, swaddled in silk so thick it looked like a giant egg. The surface pulsed faintly. Emily's throat tightened. What is that? Gallagher's voice was almost reverent. She likes to keep them alive for a while. The egg shifted, and a muffled moan seeped out. Emily took a step back, her hand drifting to the canister strapped to her belt. It was loaded with industrial-grade pyrethroid, enough to drop a wasp nest in seconds. She wasn't sure it would do much against whatever this was. Something tapped against the window from the outside. Slow, deliberate. Darren pulled a torch from his belt and shone it between the warped boards. Dozens of black eyes stared back at them, glinting in the beam. Long legs unfurled from the edges of the frame, one after another, until the boards rattled under the weight. Emily swore under her breath. These weren't redbacks, huntsmen's, or any breed she'd ever seen. They were too big, each one the size of a dinner plate, their bodies matte black and bristling with fine hairs. The tapping grew louder. The boards groaned. Back to the Uda, Emily said, her voice tight. They turned, but Gallagher didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the window, and a strange smile curled his lips. She said she was hungry. He whispered. The boards snapped inward. Spiders poured into the room. Not falling, not stumbling, but flowing, their movements too smooth, too unified. The sound was like dry leaves being dragged over stone. They hit the floor and scattered, climbing the walls, the ceiling, their silk trailing behind like banners. Darren fired the torchlight into the swarm and yanked the trigger on his spray. A sharp chemical hiss filled the air, the smell burning Emily's nostrils. Several spiders spasmed, curling their legs, but more kept coming. One leapt from the ceiling, landing on Darren's shoulder. Its fangs punched into his neck. He screamed, clawing at it, but its legs wrapped tight, silk spooling from its abdomen in frantic bursts. Emily yanked the thing free, crushing it under her boot. It burst with a wet pop, black ichor splattering the boards. Darren staggered toward the door, but two more spiders dropped onto his back. Gallagher laughed. It was a dry, broken sound. You can't stop her. She likes when they struggle. Emily didn't think. She grabbed Darren by the collar, hauling him toward the hallway. More spiders poured from the ceiling vents, their silk catching in her hair. She fired short bursts of spray, forcing a gap through the swarm, and they stumbled into the kitchen. The back door was covered in webbing, thick as a mattress. Darren's breathing was ragged, his face pale. Cut it, he gasped. She slashed at the web with her knife, the strands clinging like glue. Spiders skittered along the edges, darting in and out. One sank its fangs into her forearm. Burning pain lanced up her arm, but she shoved it away. Finally, the web gave. They burst into the blinding sunlight, staggering across the yard. Emily glanced back once. Gallagher stood in the doorway, the shadows swallowing most of his face. Behind him, the egg in the corner pulsed harder, and something inside began to tear free. They made it to the Uda, slamming the doors just as a wave of spiders hit the side, their legs scrabbling against the metal. Darren jammed the key into the ignition, but the engine coughed, shuddered, and died. The swarm climbed over the bonnet, their bodies blotting out the sun. Silk threads drifted down onto the windscreen, sticking and multiplying. Emily's pulse roared in her ears. Get started, she hissed. Darren twisted the key again. Nothing. A single, massive spider crawled onto the windscreen. Its body was the size of a small dog, its eyes glistening like black pearls. Its fangs scraped against the glass, leaving thin white lines. Emily reached for the shotgun mounted behind the seats, and that was when the glass began to crack. Chapter 2, Deeper than the dust. The glass splintered under the spider's weight, a thin crack racing across the windscreen like lightning. Emily leveled the shotgun, the barrel trembling just slightly, and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening in the cab. The windscreen exploded outward, the spider flung into the dust in a spray of black ichor. But the hole it left was worse, because now the swarm had a way in. "Go!" Emily shouted. Darren twisted the key again. This time the engine caught, coughing up a cloud of red dust as the Uda roared to life. He slammed it into gear, the tires spinning, and they lurched forward. The spiders clung to the bonnet, to the roof, skittering along the sides. One dropped into the cab through the shattered windscreen, hitting Emily's thigh. She jammed the shotgun's barrel against it and fired again, the blast shredding it into wet pulp. More ichor sprayed across the dash, burning her skin where it landed. Darren didn't head back toward the main road. Emily noticed it only when the farmhouse vanished behind them, swallowed by the shimmering horizon. The track they were on now was narrower, more winding, the gum trees pressing closer. "What the hell are you doing?" she yelled over the engine. They were on the road back. Darren barked, his eyes fixed on the dirt track ahead. "Didn't you see? Webs strung across the whole damn way. You drive through that, we're done." Emily twisted in her seat. He was right. Back toward town, the wind shimmered with threads stretched between the trees like ghostly curtains, thick enough to trap a kangaroo. The swarm wasn't just chasing them, it was hurting them. The further they went, the rougher the track became. The land rolled out in endless red dust, dry creek beds, and scattered boulders like the bones of some ancient beast. The sun was sinking now, staining the sky a dirty orange. Shadows stretched long and sharp. The Uda rattled over a dry wash, throwing Emily against the door. "Where does this even go?" she demanded. "Station tracks, maybe, or nowhere. I'm just trying to keep us moving." The spiders didn't give up. They clung to the rear tray in clusters, riding the Uda like parasites. Emily leaned out the shattered windscreen, spraying short bursts of insecticide. The chemical hiss filled the air, making her lightheaded. A few of the smaller ones curled and dropped, but the larger ones only skittered faster. Then the radio came alive again. "Stop no further, deeper." It was the same voice as before, but weaker, as if it was being dragged away from the mic. Then a different sound cut in, something wet and rhythmic like chewing. Emily's stomach tightened. By the time the sun kissed the horizon, the track had narrowed to little more than 2 faint tire marks. The Uda's high beams flickered over a fence line, sagging under the weight of webbing. Something was hanging there. At first, Emily thought it was another animal, but as they drew closer, her throat went dry. It was a man. His arms were pinned above his head, his legs fused together, all wrapped in silk so tight it shone in the headlights. His head lolled forward, his jaw slack. Then it moved. Not him, the thing inside the silk. The cocoon bulged and twitched, and a ripple passed through it as something shifted beneath the layers. The sound of silk tearing reached them over the rumble of the engine. Darren swerved around it, the Uda jarring over the ruts. "Don't look," he said, his voice tight. Emily looked anyway. Through a gap in the webbing, she saw black legs pushing outward, wet with something dark and thick. The cocoon split open, and the man's body slumped forward, but it wasn't his head that emerged first. They didn't speak for a while after that. The only sound were the engine's growl and the hiss of silk whipping against the side of the Uda. The night air was cooler now, but it carried a smell Emily recognized. Rot, sweet and heavy, clinging to the back of her throat. The ground began to rise, the track curling into low, jagged hills. Somewhere out here, in all this emptiness, the swarm had decided they belonged. Emily couldn't shake the thought that Gallagher had known this would happen, that they'd been sent not to fix a problem, but to join it. Darren slowed as they reached the crest of a hill. The headlights cut across a valley below, and Emily's stomach dropped. Webs covered everything. Not just the trees and fence posts, but the ground itself, layered thick as snowdrifts. In the center of the valley rose a mound. No, a nest. A bulging dome of silk, glistening wet in places, with shapes moving inside. The spiders on the Uda began to hiss, a dry, rasping sound that set Emily's teeth on edge. Darren's knuckles were white on the wheel. If we go down there, we're not coming back. They've boxed us in, Emily said. Look. Behind them, at the base of the hill, the track was already vanishing beneath fresh strands of silk stretching between the rocks. In the high beams, the threads caught the light like veins. The swarm wasn't chasing anymore. They were waiting. Chapter 3, The Nest. The darkness inside the mound was almost physical, a hot, damp weight that pressed against Emily's skin. She could hear herself breathing, shallow, panicked, and underneath that, the constant whisper of movement. The silk dragged against her back as they pulled her deeper, the threads warm from the bodies of countless spiders. She tried to thrash, to twist free, but the bindings cut into her skin with every movement. Something wet brushed her cheek, silk-coated in a slick film. It clung to her like oil. She could smell the others before she saw them. The stink of sweat, rot, and the metallic tang of blood that had dried and cracked in the heat. A flicker of light ahead, dull, reddish, seeping in through thin layers of silk, revealed the chamber. It was vast, bigger than the farmhouse, the ceiling arching high overhead in a dome of webbing that shimmered faintly with every shift of the swarm. The walls were studded with cocoons, hundreds of them, anchored at odd angles. Some were still, others twitched in small, jerky movements. Emily's stomach clenched when she realized the noise she'd been hearing wasn't just spiders. It was people breathing. Dozens of them, all in different stages of entrapment. The ones wrapped tight, in thick white layers, didn't move at all. The fresher victims, wrapped from the neck down, twitched weakly as silk-threaded spiders crawled over them. Emily saw one latch onto a man's bare shoulder, its fangs piercing the skin. The man shuddered, mouth opening in a soundless scream. The spider's abdomen pulsed slowly as it fed, the man's eyes rolling back, his breathing turning ragged. The feeding wasn't quick. It was deliberate, measured. The venom paralyzed without killing, so the victim's heart kept pumping, keeping the blood fresh for hours. They hauled Emily to an empty section of wall, near a cocoon that twitched every few seconds. She could see the person inside, an older man, his eyes wide but unblinking, lips moving in a low, incoherent mumble. The silk around his mouth pulsed faintly as something inside shifted. Her own bindings tightened, the swarm working with mechanical precision. Threads looped around her chest, her arms, her ankles, each one pulled taut and anchored to the wall. She could barely move her head. From a far side of the chamber came a deeper sound, the same low pulse she'd felt in the Uda. The queen. She emerged slowly, each step deliberate, the other spiders parting to give her space. Her body was enormous up close, the swollen abdomen mottled with lumps, some of them moving faintly, like eggs shifting beneath the skin. She approached one of the half-conscious victims and lowered her fangs to the man's side. The man's body jerked once, violently, before going limp. The queen drank, her abdomen flexing with each draw. When she pulled back, the man was still breathing, but his skin was pale as wax. The swarm immediately began layering more silk over him, sealing him in tighter. Emily's heart thudded painfully. Her turn was coming. She scanned the chamber for Darren. At first she didn't see him. Then a movement caught her eye. Across the room, he was hanging in a thick cocoon, only his face exposed. His eyes found hers, bloodshot but burning with anger. His jaw moved, but she couldn't hear him over the whispering legs and the muffled cries. The swarm didn't notice their silent exchange. They were focused on a new arrival. A spider the size of a dinner plate dragged in a half-wrapped kangaroo, its legs kicking weakly. They hoisted it into the wall, securing it beside the older man, then retreated to let the smaller feeders swarm in. Emily's skin crawled. Every movement of the web sent a tremor through her body. She could feel spiders moving across the silk near her feet, brushing her boots, their weight shifting as they worked. Something touched her neck, light at first, then firmer. She craned her eyes upward and saw one of the smaller feeders lowering itself from the ceiling, its fangs glistening. She thrashed, jerking her head side to side. The spider paused, swaying slightly, as if considering her resistance. Then it shifted lower, pressing the tips of its fangs against the skin just above her collarbone. A sharp, burning pain shot through her shoulder. Her vision blurred, the heat in the chamber pressing harder against her. Her limbs grew heavy, not numb, not yet, but sluggish, as if moving through thick mud. The spider withdrew, its abdomen flexing as it swallowed. It didn't take much, just enough to leave her heart pounding unevenly. Emily realized with sick clarity that they wouldn't kill her tonight. They'd keep her here, feed on her in small doses, keep her alive and aware for as long as possible. Darren's muffled shout cut through the chamber. He was struggling violently now, the silk creaking as he pulled against it. A half-dozen spiders skittered toward him, tightening his bindings. He managed to get one arm partially free before a feeder sank its fangs into his wrist. His movements slowed immediately. Emily's breath came faster, panic clawing at her throat. She couldn't move enough to help him, couldn't even turn her body away from the spider, returning to her shoulder for another slow drink. The queen's head lifted,